All right, hey everybody. It's Thursday. I hope everybody's doing well. You're surviving Vegas. You're having a good time. If maybe you had a little too late night, I'll keep my voice a little lower. But hey, it's great to meet everybody. I'm Dennis Cody. I'm with Red Panda. We are a Kafka-compatible real-time streaming platform. And I want to show you how, with a couple of our products, you can leverage Gen AI to take a bunch of unstructured data, structure it, make it useful for analytics, and do so fast enough that you can actually go from idea to validation in a workday. So, I like to make AI work for me. If AI is hard, you're doing it wrong. And one of the things that my job as a product manager that I really need to do is I need to get better analytical insights into what customers need. One of the things I found out is our sales team does Chorus AI with all of our customers. Now, I go to a lot of meetings, but I can't go to 5,000 hours of meetings. But I want those insights, because when people talk and people are having really rich communication between each other, that's really good insights. That's where people are actually giving you the real problems, the real pain points. And I want that information. I want to know our feature requests. I want to know the use cases, pain points. So, in order to build out this data, pipeline, you got to look at the challenges up front. What are you going to be dealing with? What do you need to take into account? So I had 8,000 conversations, 5,000 hours of audio, which real quickly, even compressed, turns into hundreds of gigabytes. We now start hitting the point where it becomes very difficult to manage. Very lengthy conversations, so you got to choose your model very carefully. You got fixed window sizes. This is all very private data, right? This is trusted data our customers, give us, right? They're talking to us. I don't want to betray their trust and start sending it out over the internet. So everything I do, I want to make sure it is within my data center. And then finally, one of the cool things about Gen AI is you can structure this data, which is great, because now I can start putting it into databases. I can do vector searches. There's so many more ways I can actually derive insights, in aggregate. Sort of as an overview of some of the technologies I kind of just played around with was Red Panda Connect, which is our connector and ETL pipeline software. Very simple, very easy to use, a single binary and a single YAML file, and boom, you have a pipeline. You're good to go. Great for prototyping. I need to transcribe all this data, right? Because I need to get it into a format that Gen AI can use. So I'm going to take all the audio, and I'm going to run it through Whisper. You can use your transcription tool of choice. I'll tell you why I chose Whisper for prototyping, but that is nothing special. And I'm going to show you, for folks who maybe haven't played around with AWS Bedrock yet, how easy it is to use and some of the really cool tools that they have to allow you to kind of prototype, play with, experiment with models, and start figuring out if you're on the right track. So sort of as an overview, what my solution looks like is I use Red Panda Connect to get the data, to do all the transformations, interactions with AWS Bedrock. And intermediate processing, I store in Red Panda. You can also store it in Kafka. I stored in Red Panda because it's just way easier. Again, another single binary. I got things to do. I got 8 hours to get this done in. And the reason that's important in between steps is AI is very expensive. So you want to process your data exactly once, and then move on. You do not want to keep reprocessing. Kind of stepping through the process. I just connect to Chorus AI through their HTTP API interface. Like I said, Red Panda Connect, there's 260 connectors to choose from. It's really hard to think of one we don't have, so it's a great choice. I pull out all of the raw wave audio file data, and that's you got to be careful. So when you're doing any sort of these API calls, just FYI, be very respectful of the rate limits. AWS Bedrock also has a rate limit. I'll get into that as well. One of the cool things about Red Panda Connect is to do these data connectivity exercises or to do interactions with AWS Bedrock, for instance, you build these pipelines in YAML. So it's kind of nice. You can do infrastructure as code. You can prototype very fast. Like I said, I just feed a binary, a YAML file, and my pipeline's up and running. So that's just an example. All right, so I'm going to transcribe it. What I said before is I chose Whisper. Why did I choose Whisper? I chose it because I can self-host it. And that's going to be important because when you're doing very large volumes of data, transcription, no matter what service you use, is going to get very expensive. Now, if you're prototyping stuff, your boss is going to get very, very mad if you spend $7,200 or $1,800. You're not going to be able to prototype anymore. So instead, I actually had OpenAI write me a Whisper server itself, because I'm not doing code. I'm going to use AI to make AI. And just letting it run on a G4DN extra large, $78 to process the data. Sounds great. I will say, though, if you have a small amount of data, or if you're going into production, do not do it. It is pain. All right? It took 5 days of processing time, and it kept having to get kicked every now and then. So, go for a serverless option when you're doing production. I took this audio data. One of the things you're going to want to do, whether you're doing PDF translations or you're doing audio or any sort of unstructured data, wherever possible, use open formats. It's just way nicer because you can use a bunch of tools and libraries to help you along the way. So, for instance, OpenAI by default will just output just a blob of text. Not super useful, but you can pass in an argument that basically says, hey, I want it in another format. So I chose WebVTT, which is a format for subtitles. Works very well. You can see down the right. Very easy to parse and very easy to read. So you can kind of debug your stuff as you go along. Here's an example of the code. I can share these slides later, but yeah, it's very little work to interact with these AI services. All right, let's get into the meat and potatoes. So, all right, so I have this text of these transcripts of these calls. How the heck do I turn this into something that a database can use? It's still text. LLMs are very good nowadays if you give it the right prompt to do things like output only in JSON format. What I recommend, again, you're not doing your job well with AI if it's hard. I can tell that I didn't write this because it doesn't have typos and it's grammatically correct. Because what I did instead is I went to an LLM. I said, this is what the output format is I want, right? Here's what it's going to look like coming in. Here's some examples. Write me a good prompt. So it's a meta prompt, if you will. So that's a great tip that some people don't yet play around with. One of the other things with LLMs and structuring data, you got to treat these LLMs like junior employees. All right, they don't know what they're doing. They need a lot of hand-holding and they need some examples. And you're going to hear the phrase, one shot, two shot, few shot encoding. All that means is how many examples did you give it ahead of time that it can use to try to detect that pattern. So I gave it a few examples of, hey, this is what I want your output to look like. This is the kind of content I want to see. Rinse and repeat when I give you more data. It's very powerful. Once again, you're not doing any coding. It's really almost like how you're trying to train a junior employee. But I'm a very selfish person. I'm a product manager. I only think about myself. What about other roles? What about other tasks or jobs or focuses? I did it for a product manager, but you can do it for someone in sales who says, I want to see deals that have these sort of attributes, or maybe marketing wants to see trends and patterns across customer conversations of what is important. Engineering might be curious. What features are actually getting used? What are people trying to do with the product that they're building? You just take those objectives you want, feed it into an LLM, tell it to generate a prompt for you, and give it a few examples of how you want it, and it's just rinse and repeat. This is a repeatable template. So here's an example right here. So this is anticlimactic, all of the code you need to interact with Bedrock with Red Panda Connect. It's a few lines of code. Honestly, most of it is just what you have to feed any model, anytime, anyways. And you can comment in and out, like you can comment different blocks, you can experiment with it, you can change the model. At this point, you're just changing lines of code. It's incredibly simple to prototype, to play with different models, to try different sizes. Just experiment, because a lot of AI is going to be about experimenting and just trying out to see what works best. In general, so this is, as I was playing around with Bedrock, some of the things that I came across and I think are useful points to help people. Make sure the region you're in has the model you want. Not all regions have all models, and the error you get coming back isn't necessarily very obvious. There's web pages, like there's great documentation on what it has, but you don't realize unless you're looking for it that not all regions have all models. No LLM does very well with large context sizes. The smaller the context sizes, the better you are. So for instance, that's why previously I did the prompt of summarize things. I want pain points. I want feature requests. I want very specific insights out of these very long transcripts, because LLMs don't have very long-term memories. Even the models that have 128K or a million token context window sizes degrade very fast in performance and memory. You're better off keeping it as short as possible. The rate limit. So if you are playing around with Bedrock, they take this very seriously, and you don't realize this because just in documentation, your code, you're going to be like, oh, this is fast. I can pound this as hard as I want. I can send a billion queries. It's pay as you go. They're making more money faster. They're going to get very mad because all of a sudden your code's going to break. You're going to start getting 429 rate limit errors. And then eventually you're going to start getting nasty grams from them. So definitely it is one call at a time. It's very fast. You don't really need to do concurrent calls, but just take it from me, save yourself from the ire of AWS. When you're doing this stuff as well, so when you go into AWS the UI, right? Bedrock Studio is an amazing tool. So it has all the same stuff that you might have, for instance, like OpenAI or ChatGPT, right, where you kind of just testing out prompts and conversations. It does all that as well, but with custom models and the same models you're using in the same configs that you're using. So when you're doing stuff programmatically, it can be like a little tougher to kind of validate. Oh, does this look right? Is this operating the way I want? Just getting started, use Bedrock Studio. Make sure you get the tuning and the configuration the way you like it before you convert it into code. So, all right, cool. I've processed my data. I have a lot of structured JSON. What can I do with it? So, remember, I wanted to show in 8 hours an end-to-end prototype of how I can take audio data and use it to get customer insights. For me, fastest way is my good old-fashioned RAG process, which Amazon has made so easy. I'm not even going to show any slides about it. It literally took 5 minutes. You upload your JSON objects into an S3 bucket, and in Bedrock Studio, you just point a knowledge base towards that bucket, and you have RAG. 5 minutes. Very easy. So, all right, I got this knowledge base. I got Bedrock Studio. What can I do now? I got my own personal RAG pipeline and my own little UI. I can now start asking questions about 5,000 hours of audio. I ask things like, what do I have here? What specific functional feature requests are our customers asking for? with respect to product security. So I primarily do AI and product security. Again, I'm very selfish. I want to make things work for me so I can be lazier. Don't tell my boss. And it comes back, right? It gives me aggregates. It gives me ideas, and it even will do citations of where did it pull this information from, which is invaluable, right? That's how you prevent hallucination. And so now, I can ask questions that maybe I don't feel so comfortable asking, right? Like to somebody. Maybe it's awkward. Maybe I feel like I should know it. AIs don't judge yet. I'm sure they will eventually. But for right now, they don't. So I can privately and confidently just ask questions that maybe, I would feel embarrassed otherwise too. It will return both qualitative and quantitative responses. I was actually a little surprised by that, but it was great to see. Cost, once you get to this sort of point, the cost is very manageable. For even a very large model, it only costs a few cents per query. You can tune it if you want to even get cheaper or whatever, but it's probably a few cents per query for good results. And now I have a capability. I can now just take an API of this, right? I can now share this with my team. This is now a tool that I can share with them that for other areas of our product that other PMs care about, they can ask the same sort of questions that they're interested in. Or I can share with other teams, right? Again, this is a templatized sort of approach. I can do it for any job, any position, and help people leverage GenAI to get the insights and make their jobs easier. Because again, if AI is not making your life easier, you're not doing it right. So, some good lessons learned. AI doesn't need to be hard. Like I said, so I did this in 8 hours. I used a few tools. I took an idea I had in a shower, and I prototyped it in basically a day. That's great, right? For a cost of about $80, I can try something out. I didn't have any of my data leave the data center. This is how you get around all of the bureaucracy and all the permissioning and all the other mayis. Is you keep it cheap, you keep it safe, and you keep it simple. And who knows, maybe you come up with a great idea that you're actually going to invest and turn into a product. Or maybe not, but either way, you only spent a few hours. AI in general, I always tell people this, it's a junior employee. It's a junior software engineer, it's a junior, sales engineer. It's, it will be able to do a lot of very powerful tasks. You just got to give it very explicit instructions. All right, you got to be the boss. You got to tell it how to do its job, and let it run, and it'll do a phenomenal job. And just like a new employee, validate the results. Hallucinations do not go to zero. Like there's always some fuzziness in AI. So much like a boss, you got to kind of do oversight, make sure the work is good, right? Before you kind of set it loose and feel confident. Data lineage and explainability are really important, all right? As people bring more and more AI models into their business, people are going to ask more and more questions about how did you get to that result? How was this decision made? And if you can't explain how a model came to a decision, there's going to be real trouble, right? Like your boss is going to say, well, how did you do this? Or how did you come to this decision? Saying I don't know is not usually allowed. So same with models. Be comfortable with 90%. So I know a lot of people say, hey, you know what? It has to work perfectly every time. That's not AI. Just like that's not human beings, all right? It makes mistakes. It's going to get things wrong. But that's okay, right? We're not trying to get to 100%. We're trying to get it to be as good as a human. We're trying to have it help us. So, just, again, setting it up front, be comfortable with 90%. Make sure you can afford your architecture. It's worthless if you can't afford it at production, all right? So make sure when you think about things, you start off very cheap, and then you can validate it, and then get the investment to build it, better. But start off cheap, and then realize that some people think that they're behind. They're not. All right. A lot of people are just starting with Gen AI. A lot of people are trying to figure out how to please investors who say you have to be an AI company now. You're not too late. Get started. Do it fast. Try these. Try it out. Fail fast. Move on. Right. But don't let it stop you. So with that, I'm out of time. Please visit booth 1538 if you want to learn more. I'll also be in the back if you have questions, and I can share information. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time, and have a safe flight home.